Chapter 21. A light tapping resonated from Peter's hospital room doorway. Anne was expecting to see the doctor, but instead she was surprised to see a young lady leaning against the doorframe, holding a bouquet of purple lilies. She had soft blonde curls cut short to frame her face and large, shining blue eyes. Anne immediately recognized her and welcomed her. "Gwen, come here. Let me hug you. It's great to see you." Anne embraced Gwen. Then Gwen turned to Thomas. "Hi, Thomas. How are you?" "I'm doing all right. It's great to see you." "How is he?" Gwen asked as she walked over to Peter's bedside. "We expect him to wake up at any moment," Anne said. "That's great." Gwen looked at her friend. "It seems so weird for the roles to be reversed." Anne slowly nodded in agreement. "It is quite the role reversal. Gwen's usually the ill one, and that was precisely the reason why Peter and she even met all those years ago." Anne remembered the day she met Gwen. It had been the last day of Peter's first tour. Anne had just gotten Shiloh up from his nap. She noticed she had a call missed on her cell phone. She listened to the message and rolled her eyes when she heard it was from Exa's manager. Again, gritting her teeth, she dialed Carrie's number. "Hey, did you call?" "Yes, Anne, I know you already made it clear this morning you don't want Peter to talk with anyone, but I got a call from someone who wants to meet Peter." Anne sighed. "What? No, I already said this is the last day of the tour. We go home tomorrow. We are not doing that." "Anne, it was Make-A-Wish." "Huh? A counselor from Make-A-Wish called me. Do you know the charity that grants wishes to kids who are terminally ill?" "Yeah, I know who they are. My husband's a doctor." "What did they want?" "There's a little girl here in the city who has been following the tour online. She went to the first show in Minneapolis, but now she's in Chicago visiting her grandmother. She wanted to go to the show tonight, but the tickets have been sold out for a while." "She wants tickets?" "Well, yeah, and she used her Make-A-Wish opportunity for the tickets, so her counselor thought it would be neat to get a backstage pass for her to meet Peter. Do you think that would be okay?" "I can ask him." Anne placed her hand over the phone and turned towards Peter. "Honey, there's a little girl who wants to meet you tonight. She's sick, and a charity called Make-A-Wish wants to grant her wish, which is to come and see the show and meet you." "Why does she want to meet me?" "I guess she saw you play in Minneapolis, and she must have really liked it. Would you feel comfortable if she came backstage before the show to say hi for a moment?" "Yeah, that's fine." Anne held the phone back up to her ear. "He said that's fine. Will you let me know about what time when you find out?" "Sure, that works for me. I'll see you later," Carrie replied. Anne hung up the phone and turned to Peter, who looked worried. "Mom, she's going to be nice to me, right?" "Yeah, honey, she wants to meet you because she admires you. Of course, she'll be nice to you." "Okay, just checking because most kids are mean to me," Peter stated so plainly. Anne was waiting for Peter to give a punchline, but it never came. He wasn't joking. Poor kid. Peter has no friends his age. Exa's probably his own non-family related contact, and she definitely isn't his peer. I guess maybe this tour wasn't such a bad idea after all. It does give him a positive hobby to focus on. A few hours later, Anne, Peter, and Shiloh were resting backstage when there was a knock at the door that interrupted their pre-show traditional Go Fish game. "I'll see who it is." Anne darted toward the door, holding her cards in her hand. She cracked the door open and stuck her nose out. A smile busted over her face as she flung open the door and grabbed both Tane and Paul in a bear hug. Grandpa stood behind them. He looked both tired and relieved. "Come in." "Mom, who is it?" Peter pivoted to look toward the door. "Paul! Tane! Grandpa! Did you come to see my show?" "We sure did. We couldn't miss it," Grandpa said as he scooped Peter up in a hug. "Awesome. I am so excited. Hey, do you want a sandwich? I get a whole tray. Here, look." Peter's brothers, who had gigantic appetites, typical of growing boys, walked over to the tray and were both impressed by all the food. The boys reunited with stories of their travels over sandwiches. "Are you worn out?" Anne asked Grandpa as she led him to the sofa. He sat his pudgy body on the end of the couch, leaning all the way back and putting one foot on the coffee table in front of him. His brown eyes glistened as he took off his glasses to wipe them with the end of his blue flannel shirt. "No, not too bad, but I'll be glad to get my regular afternoon naps in again. We had fun." He chuckled, then set his glasses back on his nose. "How are you holding up?" "We're great. It seems like it has been much longer than 3 weeks. So much has happened. I've been a little stressed out about all the attention Peter has been getting in the media." "You go on tour with a world-famous musician, and you're surprised the media's snooping around, taking notice?" Grandpa laughed from deep in his chest. "Yeah, I guess I learned my lesson the hard way." Another knock came from the door. "Oh, that must be our guest," Anne said as she hurried to the door, opening it to see Carrie with 2 other ladies and a little girl. Carrie spoke. "Hi, Anne. This is Amanda from Make-A-Wish, and she's here with Guinevere and her mom, Olivia." "Hi, we've been expecting you. Come on in." Anne opened the door wider. The little girl looked to be about Peter's age. She wore a scarf around her head, concealing, yet displaying at the same time, the fact that she had no hair. Pale and skinny, with dark circles under her eyes, she didn't hold back on her big personality as she walked into the room, scoping it out. Guinevere's mother wore the child's illness in the lines on her face. Anne took one look at the woman, and her heart felt compassion. She knew all too well the exhausting task of taking care of a sick child. "Peter, your guests are here." Peter looked up from his sandwich tray. He finished chewing while he walked over to them. He stopped at the fridge to grab a bouquet of purple lilies Carrie had bought for him to give to Guinevere as a gift. "Hi, Guinevere. I got you roses." Peter stumbled over the last syllable in her name as he held out the flowers. Her eyes popped wide open. "Thank you. You can call me Gwen." "Gwen," Peter repeated. "I think these are lilies," Gwen said as she looked at her bouquet. "Oh, sorry. I guess I got you lilies." "That's okay. They're pretty. I can't wait to see you play the piano again. I saw you before in Minneapolis, and I never saw anything like it. When did you learn to play?" "I just taught myself this last year. I had music class at school, and my teacher let me play her piano. I had to quit school later, but then I met Exa, and she let me play her piano, too." "Oh, I don't go to school either. I used to, but my mom said the kids might get me sick. I have a tutor now. It's nice because she lets me wear my pajamas when I work." "I wear my pajamas, too, when I do my schoolwork. That's the best part." Peter's face lit up as he realized they had something in common. "Being at home for school is better, don't you think?" "Sometimes, but I sometimes get bored." Gwen smiled slyly. "Then I miss it, but mostly I miss my friends." "Oh, I don't get bored because I play piano. I don't miss my friends because I didn't have any," Peter said frankly. "Hey, I have an idea. You can call me when you're bored at home because I'm at home too." Gwen's smile broadened. "Yeah, that's an awesome idea." Olivia placed her hand on Gwen's shoulder and softly interrupted. "I think we need to be going. Peter needs to get ready for his show. Can you say thank you?" Gwen obliged her mother. After the door closed behind them, Peter watched the emptiness of the doorway for a moment before asking, "Was her hair gone because she's sick?" "I think so," Anne said. She was suddenly relieved Peter didn't ask his question in front of Gwen. Paul and Tane started talking, and the room was instantly noisy again. Soon, it was showtime for Peter. The family had front row seats in the audience. Even Anne was going to sit with them to see what it looked like from the audience. This was it. This was the last show. Thank goodness. In the audience, Anne held Shiloh in her seat, nestled between Tane and Paul, and Grandpa was on the end. Peter looked professional and happy as he played. He has grown in the last couple weeks. He pays more attention to the audience and smiles a lot more. When Peter was done, she enthusiastically applauded, never feeling more proud, as Peter bowed and left the stage. The family stayed in their seats to watch Exa finish her segment. After a few minutes of steady applause, Exa returned with Peter to play their new encore, an original song, Lightning and Rainbows. Lively and a bit jazzy, the song was one of their favorite ones that they made up somewhere between Sioux Falls and Chicago. They were playing it tonight as a special encore audition since it was their final performance. The audience responded well to the song, and the pair did a double bow, then headed off the stage one last time. Anne couldn't get out of her chair as she was instantly trapped by people squeezing toward the door. She decided to wait until the crowd thinned out to leave, but Peter beat them by coming out to greet his family. "Mom, what did you think of lightning and rainbows?" Peter asked as he walked up next to his family. He had removed his jacket and put on a t-shirt to blend in. "I loved it." Peter was proud to hear his big brothers congratulate him. He was always in their shadows, so it felt great to be admired. The stadium was now empty as they shared in jovial conversation. Sighing in a silent moment, Anne said, "We need to head back to your dressing room. Exa arranged a surprise send-off party for you, with cake." She winked. The family headed backstage except for Peter, who grabbed his mom's arm and whispered, "Can I go on stage by myself one last time? I want to look around so I can remember it always." "Sure, we'll be in your room when you're ready." Anne touched the top of his head to smooth his hair, then left him by himself. Peter climbed the stairs to the stage. He noticed some of the maintenance people had already begun to clean up. He ran his fingers along the top of the piano keys, then glanced up to notice the way the empty seats looked back at him. Peter knew this tour was ending, but he needed to feel the butterflies one more time. Closing his eyes, he imagined the people standing on their feet and cheering. For Peter, this was a tremendous, life-changing experience that would forever set his life on a different path. Though unaware of his upcoming journey at the time, he thought the butterflies were over. Saying goodbye to the feeling, goodbye to the butterflies, he bowed one last time. He raised his body up and stood. Startled, he saw he was not alone. His eyes focused on the figure standing dead center 2 rows in, only about 15 feet from Peter. His eyes locked hers, and he froze. Ice ran through his veins, and fear knotted his stomach as he identified the ghostly green eyes that had been forever burned in his brain. The goat woman. She was standing right there in front of him. Peter's voice stuck in his throat. "She knows my song's about her. She heard my goat woman song, and she wants to get revenge." Adrenaline surged through his veins, and he scurried off stage, running straight to his room where his family was gathered in celebration. He gravitated toward his mom, who he looked to for comfort and protection, as he concentrated on blending in because the goat woman's presence had alarmed him. When the party was over, he was ready to go. He thanked Exa, but he remained mute about the night's events. He was glad the tour was over. It was time to go home. That summer had set up a tradition for the Arnold family. Peter continued to be homeschooled and to work with Exa during the school year. Each summer, she invited him back on her tour for the first 2 weeks. Years passed. Peter's fan base grew, and as it blossomed, Anne became a little more comfortable with the exposure, even allowing him to get a fan website. Time rushed by like the beating of a drum, and in what seemed like a blink of an eye, the Arnolds found themselves saying goodbye to Peter as he had graduated from homeschool at the age of 17, already a world-renowned pianist. Chapter 22. So, what brings you to town? Anne asked Gwen as she blinked away her memories, focusing on the present moment. Peter's hospital room was steeped in a heavy silence, with Gwen guarding Peter's side. I just drove up for the day to see Peter, Gwen said as she tucked a curl behind her ear. That's sweet of you. Have you talked to him lately? I called him right before the show to wish him luck and ask about my backstage pass. It was weird, though. He sounded upset or something. Do you think he wasn't feeling well? Peter could hear Gwen's voice as he was sleeping lighter than normally. He knew exactly what he was upset about 2 days ago. Exa Scarletta. He tried to squeeze Gwen's hand to respond to her presence, but he failed because he couldn't move his hands. He wanted desperately to tell Gwen what had happened. It was just 2 days ago, and Peter had been busy packing for his tour while he kept his phone glued to his ear, talking to his manager, Sammy. He flew through the kitchen to grab something to eat because he was in a hurry, but his stomach wouldn't stop growling. Got a minute? Anne asked from where she was standing by the kitchen sink. Depends. Peter ravenously attacked his cold-cut sandwich with a vengeance. I know you're busy, but there's something you might want to see in the garage. Anne pointed out the window to the garage. Confused, and knowing he really didn't have time for games, he shrugged his shoulders and sighed. I guess. It'd better be fast. Did you get me a new car for graduation? He grinned and bit into his sandwich. Mayo dripped out of the corner of his mouth. He shoved another bit of his sandwich into his mouth until his cheeks puffed out and he could barely close his mouth to chew. Holding his sandwich, he walked out the back door towards the garage. It better not be red. That's so cliché. I want an orange car, he muttered with a mouthful of food. Anne watched from the kitchen window as Peter headed to the garage alone. He trotted down the worn path. As he got closer to the garage, he noticed the side door was cracked open. Really? Did she tell me to go out here just to the door? She couldn't just shut the door herself? Reaching out to grab the doorknob to pull it shut, he noticed movement and light inside. He stiffened, afraid of the shadows since childhood. Then he hesitantly proceeded. Hello? He called. He pushed the door forward. Something was stuck behind it. He leaned on the door to get it open more, but it wouldn't go. He slipped in sideways, sucking in his already thin gut. He squeezed through the door, and his eyes adjusted to the light. He saw it. Humongous, magnificent, and striking as always, he took in its beauty. Peter had every curve memorized and every scratch etched forever into his brain. Exa's grand piano was standing before him. I want to give it to you. Exa's voice came from a shadow in the corner. She stepped forward into the light with a frown on her face. Peter fumbled, still in awe as he swallowed the last of his sandwich. No, I can't take your piano. It was a gift to you. It's worth more than some people's houses, he said as he licked off the last of the mayo that had stuck to his thumb. No, I never liked it. I saw it as more of a burden because it was always too bloody big to fit anywhere. But you adored it from the first time you saw it. I adored watching you play it. My memory of this piano is watching you love it and watching you grow as you played it. Exa stepped closer to Peter. I want you to have it. I don't know what to say. I'm proud of you, Peter. You're leaving on your first solo tour tomorrow. Look at all you have accomplished. Exa rested her hand on the piano. This piano is you more than it is me. Peter opened his mouth and then closed it, then opened it again and said, I guess. Thank you. You don't have to. You know you have given me enough. My whole career would never have happened without you. You're welcome, Peter. It's my pleasure. I wish That was the only thing I was here to tell you. But unfortunately, I also need to tell you goodbye. I'm moving." Her voice was flat, as if she had rehearsed a speech. Peter's attention shifted from the piano to Exa in alarm. "What? When?" "Now. This piano was the last thing I needed to move out of my house. My landlord officially put my house on the market 1 hour ago. My movers left this morning with my belongings, and I'll follow them right after I leave here." Exa swallowed hard. "Where are you going?" Peter's eyebrows furrowed. "I don't want to say. I just need some privacy about that." Exa looked down. "What do you mean you can't tell me?" Peter stepped forward to see Exa's face, but she turned her head. "I'm at a point in my life where I need some space. I wish I could tell you, but I can't." Exa tried to say something else, but she couldn't get the words out. Taking a few more breaths, she started to speak again. "Peter, please don't end up like me. You need to live your life. You have an awesome talent and career, yes, but don't be like me." "I don't understand," Peter said so softly that it was barely above a whisper. "Don't just work. Don't forget to live. And to love." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Peter, I adore you like a son, and please don't take this the wrong way, but we have spent so much time together over the years that I sometimes think you forgot to be a kid, have friends, and even date." Peter shook his head and said, "I don't want those things. I like piano. I try to have friends, but I wasn't a kid who liked to talk about Pokemon and Xbox. What other kid spends his weekends listening to Bach? And now all the people my age just want to drink or talk about sports. I don't relate to anyone like I do you." Exa's eyes met Peter's. She touched Peter's cheek. "I know, sweetie. We're artists. The trouble is, being an artist is like being in a one-sided love affair. You put all your energy into your art, but it can never love you back." Exa held Peter's gaze intensely for a moment, and then dropped it as she pivoted to face the piano with her back toward Peter. "Most artists end up being like me. Please, Peter, don't let that happen to you." "I don't get what you mean. What's wrong with being like you? People would die to have your career, your passion, your life." Exa turned to face Peter. "Look at me. I'm pushing 40, and I'm alone. You're married. Peter, when in the decade since we have known each other have you seen me with my husband?" Exa's words were rambling and fast. "He's in Europe, doing who bloody knows what. And the only reason we've not gotten a divorce is because it would be impossible to divide up all of our crap, not to mention the tabloid mess it would create. It's just easier to live separately and leave it as is," Exa said, as she was visibly upset. "I'm sorry I brought it up. It's not my business." Peter cut her off, hoping to stop her from getting angrier. "I just don't understand why you can't tell me where you're going." Peter touched her arm softly. "Please, Exa, you're my person, the only one that gets me. I did the public life gig for 20 years. It broke me. I can't do it anymore. It's a prisoner's life. I just want to live in the shadows." "Okay, I think I understand," Peter said, as he knew to give up when Exa got upset. "But thanks for everything, and just know that I'll really miss you. You know how to reach me if you want to." Exa nodded, offered a hug, and walked out the door. Still confused, Peter watched as she walked away, feeling sad to lose his mentor and confidant of the past 13 years. Turning back to the piano he loved, he pounded his fist hard on the keys. He sunk down onto the piano bench, hanging his head low. He breathed in the smell of the mahogany. It was a smell he knew, even with his eyes closed, and it brought a little serenity to him in that moment, but even that wasn't enough. He wasn't sure how long he'd been sitting at the piano when he heard his mom's voice. "Honey, are you okay?" She was standing behind him. "Yeah." He straightened up. "Are you loving your piano? Exa asked me yesterday if she could sneak it over here, and I had the hardest time hiding it from you. You should have seen all those men struggling to get it back here. She had a whole crew." Her voice trailed off as she saw Peter's face was flushed. "What's wrong? You don't like it?" "It's not the piano. Exa's leaving, and she doesn't want me to know where she's going. She doesn't want me to hang out with her anymore. She thinks I need to get a life and some real friends," he said in a mocking tone. Anne slid next to Peter on the bench and put her arm around him. "Well, we can't change her decision, but she may change it on her own later. I'm sorry she feels that way. I know it hurts you. Exa's important to our whole family." Anne meant what she said, too, as she really had come to love Exa like a family member. "Are you going to be able to play tonight?" "I have to play. It's all I know." Peter half smiled at his mom. "You know, there's a saying I love that goes like this. People come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. I think Exa was here for a reason. She led you to this amazing career. But tonight, you're starting a new journey by yourself. She knows you don't need her anymore." "Maybe. It's still a shock, though." Peter rubbed the whisker stubble on his chin. "I need to clear my head and get ready. Are you packed and ready for the tour?" "I'm getting there." "Yeah, me too. I need to get that done now so I can think about something else." "Will you come backstage before the show?" "Yes, of course." In Peter's hospital room, Anne watched the clock on the wall. The minute hand made a faint ticking noise that everyone could hear because it was quiet. Anne sighed heavily, breaking the silence in Peter's hospital room. Peter was upset about Exa. She moved, but she didn't want Peter to know where she was going because she said she needed some privacy. Gwen nodded. "I can see how that would upset him." "I think he tried to forget about it, but I know it will bother him. I think he'll always miss her," Anne said. "That's too bad that she couldn't be a little more understanding of Peter's feelings. But I guess she has to live her life, too." "Yeah, and I told him she may change her mind," Anne added. "Maybe, but I know Peter's resting, and you must be exhausted, too. I don't want to impose. I just wanted to stop for a second. Can you make sure he sees my flowers?" "Yeah, I will. It was so great to see you. I can text you when he wakes up." "I would like that." Gwen left the room as quietly as she had entered. Peter heard their conversation. He wanted to tell Gwen not to leave, and he was frustrated when he tried but couldn't speak. He was coming into a clearer state of consciousness, and he realized he had the ability to open his eyes. First, he saw the ceiling, and then he looked to the left. He saw his mom and dad sitting next to him. He slid his hand over to the edge of the bed. "Tom, he's awake! Peter, can you hear me?" Anne shot to her feet with a smile so broad it almost didn't fit on her face. Peter could hear them perfectly, but forming a word with his mouth was a different task. He felt like he had a bad case of cottonmouth, it was so dry. Pressure behind his eyes created the most intense headache he had ever felt. It hurt to keep his eyes open. He struggled, but everything seemed so bright. Anne noticed Peter trying to look around. "It's okay, just rest." The room seemed to get brighter. Peter closed his eyes. His head throbbed like daggers were being driven into it. He was unable to stand the pain, so he let his body drift back to sleep. He was just so tired. Chapter 23. Peter. Later that night, Peter woke up with greater ability to focus, and he had questions. At first, Thomas and Anne tried to put off his questions, but as Peter became more alert, he was more insistent. Anne and Thomas felt like it was time to include him in on some of the details of his situation. It was a moment of crystal clarity for Peter. His focus was sharper than it had been in days, and he was ready to hear about his health. "Just tell me what happened. It's my kidneys, right?" Anne's stomach felt like it jumped into her throat, and she couldn't speak. Peter turned toward his dad, but Thomas didn't say anything either. Peter pressed. "Do I need a transplant? I do, don't I?" His eyes searched his parents' faces for any hint of confirmation. Anne nodded and then looked to Thomas, waiting for him to explain. "Yeah, you already know. It's time. Your kidneys can't do this anymore." "Okay," Peter breathed. He had always known his kidneys were weak. He had heard about people having transplants before, and he knew it would be hard and painful, but worth it. He put on a brave face. "So, do I go on a list for a kidney, or how does that work?" He looked at his dad. Thomas looked at Anne, and then shook his head as he turned back to Peter. "Son, you see, in some cases that would be an option, but you need a match." He scratched his chin. "There's something called a PRA score. It ranges from 0 to 99. A score of 25 would mean that 25% of the population will not be a match for you. The antibodies present in your blood would attack the kidney. Everyone has a different score, and it goes up if you had trauma or surgeries in your life." Peter waited as his dad paused, then said, "I wish I had better news, but your score is over 98%. Thomas paused for a moment and then continued. "Your score means that out of 100 people, less than 2 would be able to donate. There's also another risk that just because you find a match, it doesn't mean your body will take it. And it's a lot to put your body through if you don't have great odds." Thomas paused again, rubbing his chin, and continued. "I don't think I've ever seen a score that high. It's because of all of your surgeries and your cerebral palsy. Your doctors think it's too risky to accept a kidney from anyone other than a direct family member and possibly only a parent. Preferably the mother." His voice trailed off as he waited for Peter to process the information. "Well, that should be okay," Peter said hopefully as his gaze bounced from his dad to his mom. "Peter, it's not that simple. If I could, I would give you my kidney in a heartbeat. But I can't." Thomas's voice cracked. Anne interrupted him, loudly sniffing back her own tears. She placed a hand on Thomas's leg and quietly begged him. "Don't tell him. Please, Tom, not like this." "Tell me what?" Peter pressed. "Please, Tom, don't." "Tell me what? Mom, you're scaring me." "How can I not? We're at a dead end. Anne, he needs to know." Thomas wiped his eye with the back of his hand. "What's your plan? I'm out of answers." "Tell me what?" Peter begged again. Now he was scared because he'd never seen his dad cry before. Anne reached out to touch Peter's face. She slid her hand down his cheek and rested her hand on his hand. Then she sat up straighter, took deep breaths, and stared directly into Peter's eyes. "I'll tell you. I'm your mother, and I'll tell you." Thomas nodded. Anne's face was pale, but she continued. "Peter, I love you. I love you more than life itself. I've always done everything I could to protect you and be there for you, and I'll continue to do whatever's in my power. I have loved watching you grow. I have learned more from you than I could learn from any teacher. Please, Know that aside from anything I could ever tell you, you are so loved. You're such a gift. Mom, I know you love me. What do you have to tell me? Peter's brain hurt from trying to solve this problem. This is an impossible conversation. Peter, we never wanted to have this secret from you. We just never knew when to tell you. You were too young and then too sick. Then you had all those issues not fitting in at school. We didn't want to make your home life more complicated. I wanted you to truly fit in somewhere. Your dad and I agreed to write a letter to give you on your 18th birthday, but you need to know a little sooner than what we had planned. Tears fell from Anne's eyes. Her cheeks reddened as she wiped them with the back of her hand. Peter waited. Anne grabbed both his hands, squeezing them hard. She said the words she never thought she could. Peter, you're adopted. At first, Peter didn't react. He kept looking to his mother to explain, but when he realized she didn't have any more words, he stuttered, "What?" Both his parents nodded, and Peter fumbled for words. So, how? What about Paul and Tane and Marie? They're your siblings and always will be, as well as Shiloh and the twins, but no, they're not adopted. You're the only child we adopted. Now you tell me? Peter whispered out of breath. Like I said, we were going to tell you in a few weeks when you turned 18. We just didn't want you to ever think you were less than a part of our family. Peter, you mean the world to all of us. Anne dabbed the last of her tears away as she felt better now that she got the words out. Does everyone know? No. All the kids, even your grandparents, everyone, they all think you are our birth child. I guess it's up to you if you want to tell them. Why all the secrecy? Thomas and Anne looked at each other, and Thomas shrugged his shoulders. It's hard to understand, Peter. We did the best we could. We just didn't know what to do. Peter, who was pale as his hospital sheets, drifted into deep thought, exploring his childhood memories for clues. I had no idea. I always felt loved, especially by my mother. I always felt like I was her favorite. But then he stumbled on a memory that confused him. He turned to his mother. He said sheepishly, I remember nursing. Anne nodded her head. Yep, I nursed you. I was able to get my milk back, and we nursed for a long time. I think you were almost 2. It doesn't surprise me that you can remember it. She watched Peter's face, and it seemed the special sparkle that he had in his eyes was being dimmed. Peter, please don't overthink this. We are your family, always have been and always will be. I'm sorry we didn't tell you sooner, but really, it's better this way. Do you know my birth parents? Why? Well, you just said if I don't get a kidney from my real parents, then I probably won't find one. Peter's bright blue eyes darkened even more as he was mentally connecting the dots. The shock of being adopted had delayed the connection about the kidney being unavailable, but now Peter saw his situation clearly. Thomas spoke up. Son, we sort of went through the church for your adoption. Father Raymond helped us, but it was definitely a closed adoption. So, would he have record? Would he be able to contact my birth parents just to see? Peter leaned to look into his dad's eyes, but it was Anne who spoke. We can talk to him and see what he says. She smiled, but it was obvious to Peter that it was a forced smile. Do you think I'm going to be okay? His eyes darted between both of his parents. Anne pulled Peter into an embrace. He could feel her body trembling. Peter, We're going to do our best. We haven't come this far to give up now.